I've always been a huge jazz fan. The very first film I ever did out of film school was a project called Dream Recording, which was a 1940s black and white jazz movie. For me, it was as much about using Chet Baker and some of the elements of his story to tell something bigger that I kind of wanted to tell anyway. And I discovered, especially this certain slice that we look at, the comeback story, the fact that he lost his teeth and had to come back, the fact that he was approached to make a film about his life. It just struck me the fact that he was, you know, a white man trying to impress black idols in a time of racial change in America. Like, these were themes that I thought were really interesting. We happened upon an actor in Ethan who already knew a lot about Chet Baker, who in his own right had thought about making a Chet Baker movie in the past. And it was kind of like encountering somebody else who was as obsessed and knew the general world and the story as I did. And so it felt like a real kind of partnership, and that I kind of found this kindred spirit.
It falls in that category of historical fiction. It's not a biopic. It's kind of hard to describe, but I always imagined if you laid down in your room and you put on a Chet Baker record, this is the movie that you would imagine. And there's something powerful about Chet Baker's tale. Somebody who killed themselves on drugs and simultaneously fought so hard to live through their music. You know, people who are destroying themselves create a vacuum, and it's incredibly painful to the people around them. And there's a certain type of person, me included, who is really drawn to that and wants to help and wants to, you know, and that's its own addiction. You know, there's this own kind of ego at work and thinking that you're so powerful that you can help some, you know what I mean? It's a very interesting, and people like Jane and people like Dick get sucked into Chet's vortex. I started, I guess it was about 6 months ago that we first decided to do this movie. Maybe more than that now. And around that time, I started taking lessons. My trumpet teacher told me that if I had 5 years to get ready for the movie, I'd be terribly behind. That I was never going to play remotely like Chet Baker. You know, that it was an impossible dream.
Chet Baker didn't write any of his own music, which was kind of liberating for us in a way, because we could choose whatever we want, and we re-recorded everything with our own jazz artists, David Braid, the guy that I've worked with in the past and who I love. And so we were very much able to kind of craft our own soundscape. And we could all do that beforehand, and we pre-recorded Ethan's vocals. So going into the film, we already had all of our music.
Jazz is an American art form, really one of our few. For me, it's fun too, because you know, it really predates rock and roll. I mean, it's really the energy of jazz in the 50s is not what jazz is now. You know, West Coast jazz, what Miles Davis didn't like about it was a bunch of white guys in love with him, making more money than he was making. I mean, it would piss anybody off. But I don't blame Chet for that.
Chet had a bit of a thing for exotic women, but he had a lot of women over time. And so this idea of kind of building a mixed race relationship at that time is also very interesting to us.
I play two characters in this film. I play Jane, who is an actress who meets Chet Baker on a film set. And then I also play Elaine, who is the character that Jane plays on that film set. So I have this wonderful opportunity to play these two very different women. Jane, there's a lot more substance. And throughout this film, she is really his wingman and helps him find himself, essentially, or not, you know, depending on where we are in the film.
Her and Ethan just have a great chemistry. They're both from Brooklyn, which made things very nice as well for us in developing the project. She's a Brit, but she's also she's lived in America for a long time, and she understands America, and this was an American character.
We really are working with a very different script than the one I originally signed on to do, and that's testament to the fact that Ethan was very, very much encouraging of Jane having equal strength on screen as Chet. You know, she wasn't just going to be second fiddle, and she had to have charisma and personality of her own enough to stand up to a character like Chet. And I think Ethan, it's quite obvious in the work he's done previously that he enjoys the dynamic between a man and a woman on screen, and the dialogue that comes from that, and the emotion that is drawn out of that. And this has been no different. It's been fantastic to work with him. Yeah, it really has.
Callum's always been one of my favorite actors, and so I was really thrilled to have him on this. And him and Ethan have a very good dynamic together and a certain playfulness, which has been really nice to see.
So I had like a bit of trepidation. Oh, this Richard Bach, I'll look him up. And then there was nothing to find. Like, he had his body of work, but you couldn't tell if he was married, you couldn't tell if he had kids. This is his body of work. So that kind of took me off the hook of going, oh, there's no real idea of how this person will be played. Like, it's open. Maybe from a bit of my relationship to some of the people in my career, like what that means to be a manager, what that means to be a person who sort of oversees without judgment and sort of just guides you.
Dick is loosely based on a guy named Richard Bach, but I've also kind of composited all of Chet's managers and producers and friends into this one kind of character. And so he serves all these purposes in the film of being kind of a father figure at times, being a brother figure at times, being a manager friend at times. And he also, because ultimately the film is kind of about this choice of kind of love versus art on the very highest level. And he's also the guy that kind of ultimately says, like, you know, you should choose, like he chose ultimately love. He had a family, he had a wife, and he was a musician at one time and he formed a record company. There's lines in the movie saying he sold out, but he never really sold out. He just changed, he evolved. Whereas in some ways, Chet Baker kind of didn't evolve. It was a sexy, fun time in America, and it was kind of a rebellious counterculture thing that the jazz artists were doing, as rebellious, if not more so, than hip hop or rap or certain things that people think is all, badass now. But they were in some ways nothing compared to some of the jazz guys in the 40s and 50s who probably lived much harder lives and were much more rebellious because the standards at the time were much more conservative. And so I'd like to think it's going to appeal to a wide audience.
What I love about Chet Baker, as somebody who works is I love the fact that, he basically never got a good review his whole career, I mean, it's funny, early on he did, but people made fun of him his whole life, and his records are still selling. I love that, and just because artists always, want to be understood, and sometimes you're not understood. And I think lots of us can take we can be inspired by that.